Good afternoon. I'm Miroshnichenko Vasil, the co-founder of UCMC and strategic communication partners company UC Big Ideas. I'm glad to welcome you all. Today we have final discussion about cultural diplomacy. This is the second discussion organized by the Ukrainian Institute together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had discussion last week and we presented the 5-year strategy of the Ukrainian Institute, and today we are going to discuss the topic that is called cultural diplomacy in the context of regional priorities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. We're going to speak about geography, about those targets that the state has, and how Ukrainian Institute and the ministry will work together and will reach those goals that were set by the state. We have an interesting panel. We have interesting speakers. I would like to visit them. Emina Japarova, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Sergei Kolsonsky, Director of Diplomacy Academy, named after Gennady Udovenko, and also newly elected ambassador to Japan. We hope that he will start soon in Tokyo. And also today we have Andrei Kurkov, Ukrainian writer, journalist, scriptwriter, the president of Pan-Ukraine. Katerina Smagli, head of Department of International Cooperation and Communication at Diplomatic Academy, and also a member of program leader of the Next Generation McCain Institute, US, and she studied topics connected with public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and today she's going to share with us her experience. Today also we have Gennady Maksenko, Executive Director of Ukrainian PRISM and head of Public Counsel at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Gershimko, Director of Ukrainian Institute. So we have supported UCMC, and we are grateful to Ukraine Crisis Media Center for this. And also, we'd like to remind you that next week, on the 30th of July, we'll have next discussion. We're going to discuss the strategy of actors, of those who carry out activities, diplomatic activities. And you may watch broadcast through the page of the Ukrainian Institute, and also you may watch Ukraine Crisis Media Center YouTube page. We have simultaneous translation. That's why I ask to speak slowly in order that our interpreters be able to interpret you properly. So, but cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy in the context of improvement of Ukraine in the image of Ukraine in the world. There are some factors that seriously influence the perception of the state in the world. So higher level of corruption, lack of independence of courts, one unfavorable business climate. In order to change those things, we should implement state policy that would be efficient and would allow us to reach results. When we are speaking about cultural diplomacy, we have culture. It is diverse. It is interesting aspect. This is reflected in the Ukrainian Institute strategy, and the Netherlands, Austria, and other countries. They are really important. The audience there is really wants to have high quality products. So we should understand what may be this content, and the key challenge is a resource, because cultural diplomacy needs funding, energy, human capital, and I'm really glad that we have today such institutions as the Ukrainian Institute that are able to correctly manage the process and to have better results and effect. And also internal processes forming the brand of the state, and during the recent years, Ukraine is now not terra incognita and for many countries of the world, and we have internal and foreign processes. We speak with Euro-Atlantic countries. We show and they are interested what Ukraine is today. And in 2014, we started these reforms and 20 most important reforms in different areas. And for me, this should be reflected in the cultural content and through the language of culture, we may show Ukraine and how it overcome all those challenges. And at my previous position at the Ministry of Information Policy, we worked with Ukraine as a brand, and it should help to have more effect concerning perception of the step of the country, visibility of the country in the world should be increased. And about regional priorities, it is clearly stated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have 3 regions, Asian region, and I hope that Mr. Sergei Kursunsky will increase this area, because Japan is one of the main priorities for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then Middle East, and there was lack of attention to this region, and now for Ukraine this region is important. Connected with the conflict with the Russian Federation. Russian Federation actively works in this region of the Middle East and Northern Africa, and we should reinforce our efforts there. I had an opportunity to travel to these regions, and I would like to say that they do not know a lot about Ukraine, and I believe that we should take into account Islamic factor, Crimean Tatars, factor that are indigenous peoples in Ukraine, and also I believe that we should open those doors. We may open the hearts of Muslims to Ukraine, and also Euro-Atlantic direction. We have normal situation here. I would like to state that this is the interest to Ukraine in the context of reforms that are ongoing, and the priority that we fixed in the constitution of Ukraine. This is it's NATO and EU, and this is the transformation of our conscience. We are European state, and we should communicate that this is really important for us through our culture, through proper messages concerning these issues.
Well, I suggest that everybody has a chance to have an introductory remarks, and then we are going to address the first questions to Emine, since she has to leave us soon. And please mind that if you would like to ask to put your questions to the MFA, try to do that first of all. Now I give the floor to Sergei Korsunsky, who actually is the head or director of the Diplomatic Academy, and we hope that soon he is going to reach Tokyo, and we hope that the Olympic Games will be staged there anyway, because we heard a lot that were going to cancel that. But anyway, this is a very good way to promote the knowledge about Ukraine. So please, Sergei, the floor is yours in the context of our discussion. And we know that the priority of Asia, when I hear the word Asia, it scares me, because Asia is a huge continent. It's very difficult to separate something, some different regions like the Far East, Ocean region, etc., etc. So when I hear the word Asia, it kind of intimidates me, because this is kind of a huge, something which you cannot grasp immediately. So your reflections on this specific subject matter. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. Welcome to everybody. I would like to welcome everybody. Well, a few words not only pertain to my future work, but my previous work as well. First of all, I'm happy that we have a Ukrainian Institute at last. And from the very beginning, it was just an idea to be discussed. We met quite often, and we just tried to understand what we could do together. We were dealing with the public diplomacy. And now our employees of this institute, they participate in training diplomats, educating diplomats, and Nobody, those who are in the orbit of the MFA, have any doubt about the importance of that. I'm a bit scared when I remember one thing. We have about 15 years when our embassy has been established in Turkey, but we haven't had any Ukrainian day or week or 10-day period in that country. But maybe we lack the necessary resources. If it were not for our goodwill and our close relationship and cooperation with the Turkish government, maybe this would not be the case even now. Turkey, why I'm talking about Turkey? Because we have a centuries-old relationship. I'm talking not only about neighboring relations, but our culture and the Cossack era, etc., etc. And actually, that means that realistically, there is no real, there has not been a real policy. Thanks God, we have it now, nowadays. Speaking about the past priorities, this is not my business, let's say, but I'm really happy that it's kind of coincidence. And I hope that next fall I'm going to reach Japan and I'm going to work there. And we already discussed the specific issue that it's not only political or economic priority for the Ukraine, but also this is one of the priorities for Ukrainian Institute. We are not very well established or not enough present there. What we have done so far, it was kind of amateur approach, and we would like to have more systematic and more dedicated efforts to be thrown in just to demonstrate that Ukraine is much bigger, much more profound in interest culture, which is rather well integrated in international process. I read a lot about Japan. It's my pleasure to say that this country is very much. It has a lot of opportunities for cultural, let's say, inputs, if you will. And you remember some very famous cartoons, specifically animated art of Japanese. There are some Ukrainians with bandura. There are some Japanese citizens who live here and play bandura. There is Ukrainian citizens, a girl who lives in Japan and sings there, and she's very much interested in whatever is associated with your profession. And actually, the Japanese citizens really value when somebody else actually take interest in their culture, in their country, when they respect it, etc. In that country, they put on the screen the modern Ukrainian movies and documentaries, and those are just fragments, episodes. And inshallah, as Arab says, and if we have really the Olympic Games, this this is a very good opportunity for large scale activities, or let's say campaign, but just have to find the proper time, proper, let's say, format in order to draw attention to attract attention, if you will, or to draw attention from of Japanese to the Ukraine, taking into consideration that the world is undergoing a lot of changes, that the culture and the outlooks also subjected to changes. And I do agree with our moderator when we hear the word Asia. Asia is a very different notion. And we were talking about Japan. This is the biggest, the largest democracy in Asia. It's the third largest economy in the world, and we have to take the chance, and I take the chances into you. I know that Andrei Kurkov traveled a lot over Japan, and this is a very well known person. I don't know whether his books have been already translated into Japanese or not. If not, but we have to do everything, to make it happen. Oh, you have already. We actually publish a lot of, let's say, works and books of the Japanese writers, and Japanese people also read a lot. This is a part of their own culture, and naturally, our opportunities, our possibilities are limited by our dreams so far. I hope that we are going to overcome the existing, let's say, limitations or restrictions which we are living through in this world of ours. Yeah, I know that in Japan, the local citizens suffer a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic, but we hope that this will go away anyway one day. And I really look forward next year the representatives of Ukrainian Institute visiting Japan, and I will try to find partners in Japan starting from the very first days of my presence in that country, in order to make happen, let's say, implementation of very serious projects in that country. Thank you very much for your invitation. It's sent to me, and I'll be prepared to take questions, if any. Thank you very much. I hope that you're going to invite not only representatives of Ukrainian Institute, but all the participants in our discussion, because we also wish very much to be there. Now I'd like to turn the mic to Andrei Kurkov. Maybe he is the only representative of Ukrainian culture at our today's discussion. Of course, we do not have to say a lot about this person to you. Andrei, let's say, can you share your ideas, your thoughts regarding our topic we are going to discuss today? Actually, you wrote a very nice books, and many countries actually publish your books in their own languages. Our country did not help you to do that. No, I was not. Well, in your opinion, maybe somebody else would like to have such a support from the government of the state of Ukraine. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank MFA of Ukraine, because over the last 15 years, their activities have changed drastically for the better. I remember in the 1990s when a Ukrainian writer went to Germany, Ukrainian diplomats were afraid that he was going to say something wrong. And once one of our diplomats actually shut the door loudly, when I mentioned a few words about Kuchma, and he just left the audience. Starting from the 2000s, we had the diplomats who started to invite Ukrainian writers on behalf of the embassies, relevant embassies, to come to that or another country and to tell about this or another book which was going to be translated in the relevant language. So we have to address an intelligent, intellectual citizens of this or another country, those who love or take interest in music, in cinema, and who understand that the culture works for them, and so that Ukraine can reach them there. And those efforts actually form the impression about Ukraine. First of all, there is a political interest towards this or another country, and then it entails the cultural interest, because you cannot comprehend or understand this or another country without its culture, the nation, the citizens, etc. For example, if anything happens in one of the countries, for example, in Albania, if something happens, and somebody will go to the bookstore and ask the local, let's say, sellers, do you have anything about Albania or some books or whatever? And Ismail Kenar, one of the writers who knows Albanian language, he told a lot about Albania. He lived in Albania for 20 years, and he came back to Albania. He was in France. But he actually shouldered the burden of giving the information about Albania. They were not lucky. They had only one such writer, but there are some countries where several writers tried to give the information about the respective countries to a big number of people. For Ukraine, this kind of interpretation, let's say, conveying the information, in each country this information works differently. For example, in Poland, when the Ukrainian culture is well known and all the intelligent and, let's say, the Polish, they read a lot of information, the newspapers, then they started to read the books, then the older writers, then they switch over to more modern writers. But we have to work in Poland in a different way as compared, for example, with Germany, where there is a big competition with the Russian culture, which actually, let's say, took to that country whatever we had in the Soviet times. For example, if we visit Lithuania or any Baltic states, they will take special pleasure to communicate with us because they give us a preference because of some historical issues. But in other countries, there is no preference. If we are talking about our Ukraine, for example, in Italy, the leftist parties are very strong and powerful, like in Greece as well, and they hear the news or get the news about Ukraine via Moscow. And then we have to exert more efforts, cultural efforts, including the efforts of diplomats or cultural diplomats. I would not divide or separate Europe from Asia. Europe is not a monolithic entity and not monochrome, and perhaps it would be more difficult for us to make our voice well heard in that part of the world than, for example, in Czech Republic or in Poland. History has two interests if we are talking about our country, historical and ecological. And we can actually use both of those in order to convey to them the following message. I mean, our cultural message and make them interested in our country. For example, I visited first time Japan in 2015 when in Japan they published in the Japanese language my history of Maidan. They invited me, but that was not a presentation of my book. Those were rather public discussions and the lectures I delivered therein about Ukraine. Usually represent the culture, there. And this interest was always associated with the Chernobyl accident. And actually, and this interest grew even stronger after the Fukushima accident. There was a very interesting little book by Martin Kamish, which is called The Zone. And this book tells about illegal tourism to kind of stalkers, into the Chernobyl area. And then actually this book made a kind of real it called kind of wave of interest first in Italy, but in France, etc. And of course, such a book should be promoted, and it has to reach the land of Japan. And any cultural action which can be realized in a country, we have to plan a kind of a link of the chain, so that chain becomes longer and longer. And this is a unique opportunity to do that today, because many of our writers have a command of foreign languages. They know how to publicly speak in public. And over the last 15 years, I can talk about some specific trend that in American, Canada, in the Western Europe, and even in India, they often invite for public discussions not politicians, not even journalists, but rather writers and the representatives of the scientific circles. I mentioned India. This is the country where we have to make our presence. This is very important to be present there, because in that country, like in China, there is a big love still for the Soviet Union. Many local populations still believe that the Soviet Union still exists. It hasn't died, So we have to bring our new culture to that part of the world, that the Soviet Union actually demised, There is no longer any Soviet Union, and each new country has its cultural face, its own cultural face. Thank you, Andrei. We are going to put some questions to you. Now I would like to give the floor to Ekaterina Smagli. Ekaterina, you have a very interesting topic. On the one hand, you would like to talk about America, and on the other hand, we have our interest in America, and we have to introduce our culture and our presence there. We have to really to introduce our cultural diplomacy in that country. And there is an interesting story. This is the United States we were talking about. Like any other developed countries, they do not have to exert so many efforts because they have Hollywood. They have the business, whatever works by itself without any support on the part of the respective government, but the whole world actually follows that and consume the cultural products, and through those products they actually perceive or develop their perception of the United States. We know it, for example, after the collapse of the regime of Saddam Hussein, there were a lot of anti-American, anti-USA sentiments in the Middle East countries, and a lot of efforts were exerted in 2004, etc., etc. Many people actually burned the U.S. flags, etc., etc. But your children, I know, they studied at Harvard University, so you can maybe share your experience. Well, U.S. really is a unique case, very interesting case, and while you were talking, maybe the most successful example of American diplomacy came to my mind, Condoleezza Rice, I'm talking about, who during the outbreak, or let's say the blossoming of the anti-American sentiments, she actually made a lot of public speeches, and she is actually a brilliant pianist, and she played piano many times, and even she gave some concert dedicated to the Queen Elizabeth in Great Britain. Repeatedly, more than once, she was on the stage in the United States. Even in her apartment, she gave some concerts to the, let's say, diplomatic corps, or those diplomats who worked in those days in the United States. So I'm going to start with some of the theses. I would like to start with the words of gratitude to the Ukrainian Institute, which actually starts a very unique thing to all of us, like a new institution. And they actually give us an example of a model of an open discussion of the different pontiffs. Actually, employees of the Ukrainian Institute have worked on that specific subject matter for many months, where dedicated labor is required. And we are talking about those issues which actually fall under the jurisdiction of MFA of Ukraine. We should not forget that the Diplomatic Academy and the Council of Investors under MFA and all the organizations who work out their strategy, they work together, coordinated their efforts, and all of us, we have something to do to implementation of strategy of the cultural diplomacy. I believe that all this made all our efforts more systematic and efficient. So I just can call every one of you to our partnership and coordination efforts, all the players who are presented here under the general umbrella of the Ministry of Culture, of course. It gratifies my heart to understand that the ambitions of the Ukrainian Institute and the approach they used for that, to work out this strategy. This is really very important. But this ambition, the beginning of the road, can actually make a trick for you. And actually, my question is, what is the uniqueness and value of the Ukrainian Institute as per se? Because the priorities which you establish for yourselves can be used in the same way by some other new institutions, the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation and the Art Arsenal and the Ministry of Culture, to that matter. So I would like, if you're talking about your strategies, so any reader, any expert who deals seriously with the issues of international policy and international relations, they ask why actually there is some added value of the Ukrainian Institute in this. Very often they have kind of the discussion, what is more sharing, I mean, in this cultural diplomacy. So maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems to me that there is a lot of culture, but I would like to have more diplomacy in that. And again, to my mind, we could do that if you involve in the development of the strategy and its implementation more experts who work on a daily basis in diplomatic sphere, former diplomats, former ministries of foreign affairs, advisors, counselors, etc. Even the incumbent, let's say, ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, who knows what kind of instruments of Ukrainian diplomacy could help him. He knows better than anybody else how to help Ukraine and the Ukrainian Institute with its strategy. So next time, maybe when we have a new wording of this strategy, to find more names, not only of Ukrainian experts who we do have to thank for their interest in this work of this institute, but more highly skilled professional Ukrainian diplomats. I was amazed that some of the priorities which have been mentioned by MFA did not find their reflection in your strategy. And I'm talking about cooperation with the Ukrainians living abroad or the businesses dealing abroad for the attraction of their investments, how culture can promote attraction of the investments. And those issues are not reflected at all, in that. And I would like to ask how the Ukrainians is going to help MFA to reveal the old stereotypes existence, that we should not hush down that we still are the victims of the aggression. So our cultural diplomacy have, first of all, to focus their attention on this specific issue. If the priorities are subject to changes, and we said that we have to promote our images as a country would like to implement its reforms, but now we are talking, in this case, about a different type of a diplomacy. I would like to advise or recommend the Ukrainian Institute to partially depart from the programmatic structure which you have today. I understand that your divisions are subdivided into the, so to say, trends or directions of your activities, culture, cinematography, MOOCs, etc., etc. As the first Deputy Minister of MFA mentioned, we need our focus on specific regions. It's very important for you to understand the specifics of each separate region. What are the interests of Ukraine in every relevant or respective region? And you already have experience of implementing similar projects. What projects could be instrumental, could be successful in this or another region? I would like to say a few separate words about the Ukrainian Institute side. I believe that they are talking mostly about grants and the possibility of grant support. I would like to have more live stories on that side, and the interviews with the figures of art, artists, the Ukrainian movies, maybe short documentaries or videos about Ukrainian museums, because the dry figures do not ensure this impression about Ukrainian culture or knowledge about that. The factor of time is very important for the Ukrainian Institute. They have been working for to come up with their strategy for a long time. And after several months of that such work, we are forced to immediately, without any preparation, to change that. So my advice is to work less on the strategy, but to do our homework and work more on the mistakes we actually committed and made along that road. We need to depart from the situation when we should not. We should depart from the possibility to become kind of grant-based organization, and we have to come up with our own product. Now, coming back to the United States, using opportunities, strengths, SWOT. Actual strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank once again for the Department of State for the Pompeo's Crimean document. We would like to say that our biggest force is Ukrainian diaspora, which over the last 60 years established or set up a lot of different Ukrainian institutions on the territory of the United States. They are scattered. Not only New York is culturally represented, but also Detroit, San Francisco, Chicago, and even Arizona, where I lived for last year. A lot has been done by the previous ambassador. I would mention his effort, because after the Revolution of Dignity, even before the Ukrainian Institute was established, we had the Department of Ukrainian Culture Diplomacy. There were a lot of projects, and the key ones of those opening the monument to the Ukrainian genocide, victims. And I believe that we still have to continue this topic as well. In the future, I would like to request that we should continue the annual project of Ukrainian debtors in the United States. Our weaknesses, those were the strengths. Our weaknesses, only 2 projects of the Ukrainian Institute were actually targeted in the United States. Only one was targeted 1% on the Ukrainian diaspora, on the cultural exchange. As Vasil mentioned during when he opened our discussion, that only elite studies in the Ukrainian, in the United States universities, and not only elite is going to work to work on the issues of statehood, etc., etc. They were talking about the diplomats of other countries. So you have this opportunity to share the information. So I'd like to call upon you to disseminate this information as much as possible. And diplomatic academy can also be a very reliable partner. Why not to have next summer the first school of Ukrainistics and summer curriculum for those wishing in the Ukrainian Diplomatic Academy for our foreign colleagues. Our challenges is Russia and a lot of money which they actually allocate for in cultural, and actually Ukraine will not be able to win over Russia in this respect. For the lack of time, I'm not going to mention a lot of names who contributed to like $30 million into victory in the territory of the United States. Our projects must be mobile, be capable of light multiplicacy on the territory of other countries. What I'm talking about, the project 50 discoveries, inventions, which was actually became public in the United States. We can do the same in other countries, like in Japan, because it uses universal language. The projects of the USMC, we can use that in order to also. Our biggest opportunities, 30 Universal Independent Ukraine next year. Ukrainian institute like the MFA must actually use this outstanding date to once again remind to the whole world about the contribution of Ukraine into the preservation of peace and our participation in the peacemaking efforts of the United Nations and our reforms and the threats that everything may remain without any changes. We again are going to say goodbye and actually dig ours, let's say, and be in our be our offices, and it will be soft and not smart diplomacy. And thank you very much. This is very critical, very good feedback, because this is really very important for the institute. Because indeed, we are talking about the kind of the roadmap, let's say, and this could be regarded as a working document, and we really are tuned to do everything we can in order to crystallize whatever is ahead of us, And then, by the way, the 50 inventions is a project which was initialized by UCMC. Yeah, I know that there are a lot of questions, but I would like to turn the mic to Gennady. We are talking about regions and the priorities. We mentioned United States and Asia, and the Middle East has been mentioned already as well. But if you would like to continue this topic, because we have this kind of regionality topic, from the point of view of priorities of our foreign policy. Thank you, Vasil. I'm going to start with my gratitude towards the team of USMC, because your huge work can be easily seen on this strategy, and we understand what you would like to reach and achieve. And of course, it's our pleasure to realize that the Ukrainian prism is one of the bases of this development. So if do not feel very comfortable, because I'm going to criticize a bit what is going on. I agree with Katerina, but the cultural the diplomacy is a very important thing. Culture and diplomacy. When we were talking with Vasil before we actually opened this meeting, we mentioned that when somebody organizes some cultural events abroad, whether we should regard this as a cultural diplomacy activity or not. So if you are talking about some of the components, maybe we lacked this understanding in order to demonstrate how further on a diplomacy should, whatever should be taken by diplomacy after the culture made their initial steps, So we have to think how your pyramid from the informant to the full-fledged activities, what do you have to do to talk about cultural diplomacy in order to achieve our priorities. The second important thing in your title, if you're talking about the MFA, I do not agree that we have well-articulated regional interests. If we are talking about our cooperation, yes, Constitution mentioned that we have a lot of strategic documents which demonstrate that we do have some movement toward that end. When we are talking about Asian, which is also mentioned in your strategy, and the current regional strategies like Asian or whatever else. So far, I feel that maybe you'll be successful with the Asian strategy sometime in the future. But nowadays we can talk about some draft document, and we can talk about regions as our priority sphere of our activities. And Middle East, also I would like to mention that, but I can't see any grand strategy in that region either. So maybe I should formulate our understanding different way, what we would like to achieve through this tool of our instrument, of our cultural diplomacy. Catherine also mentioned that we have some manifolds, let's say, or the trunk lines, if you're talking about specific topics or subjects, if you're talking geography. We have some, we're in China or Asia or Japan, I mean. Why not to say that this is not the subject of the country which is located in Asia, but those are members of the G7 who can actually resolve very important issues. And we have to take that into consideration. I mean, the decisions which they take to consolidate the international relationship, etc., because we are talking about some kind of reform. One of the ideas which was mentioned by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, how we can wrap that in the reform envelope. So to say that we must mention we cannot base ourselves on those. Well, we can base ourselves on what have mentioned, like counter action or to the Russian aggression. Mentioned that, or the global Ukraine ship. Let's say we mentioned that, but so we it kind of deflated a bit. I mean, if you're talking about this issue, I elect some neighboring countries' orientation because Central Europe on the whole is much bigger player if we're talking about interests as compared to the approach mentioned in your original initiative, like Poland and Hungary. Of course, there are some sensitive issues in place, but even Visegrad 4, like a reorganization, or the Three Seas initiative, or Bucharest 9, all those steps, we are moving towards those through our initiatives we're going to entertain now. When we are talking about thematic priorities which have to be entertained in the, let's say, through the prism of the interest. But again, cultural speaking, they agree to cooperate culturally. But whether it is going to be your portfolio or, let's say, the ministry, I don't know, we have to take that in consideration as well. From formation to positive attitude, how we move, how we understand each other. 1 year is not enough. Annual priorities, or 1 year priority. I understand what ideas were basis for that. This is not enough for the general strategy. And this may take not only 5 years, even more than 5 years. So we have to take in consideration other instruments, our tools, other indicators. It's also very important to understand what toolbox we have. I can understand what you have. Maybe you would like to we proceed from the opportunities of the budget available. How you're going to move forward from this day. But again, there is no mention of what you have in your toolbox, and this kind of concerns me a bit because we have to make a step toward this kind of formation in order to form or to, let's say, formulate the necessary decision. Like Ukrainian prism, in the end of the year, we ask ourselves what kind of attainments or achievements we have, what are the regions where Ukraine could be a leader. but somewhat we forget somewhat about the Chernobyl region and the Oriental Partnership, or Eastern Partnership, I mean. We could do it more for the Armenia, other countries, Bulgaria, Romania, and find our common interests. I am going to stop here, but that I believe that we have a lot of work to do together. Thank you, Gennady and Vladimir. Reflection upon reflection, they say. I know that you're against instrumentalization of culture per se. This is kind of a trend which is very widely used in some of the developed countries. Maybe it has a right to live. And I understand there will be a lot of questions and comments in this specific context. Thank you very much. The previous speakers for feedback regarding our strategy. It seems to me, as far as I can remember, this is the first case of public discussion of these documents can be kind of a roadmap of the, let's say, the landmark and what kind of Ukrainian cultural diplomacy is now and can become over the next few years. And your recommendations are very valuable, and we repeat ourselves very often that this strategy is a live document, and we are guided by the practical, let's say, by basis and whatever can actually guide our activities in the future. Regarding your question, Vasil, the question which actually pursues us from the very first day of our existence: can we instrumentalize the culture for political purposes? I like a kind of the in-between notion that culture is the policy should not be put over anything else. Over each other. We have to work for the state interests through we are doing that through cultural content, which is produced by Ukraine, and through those things which appear in the Ukrainian cultural field, the political field. There is no controversies. Those are not controversial. It is something which can be done by the Ukraine Institute, by any other players who work in the field of Ukrainian diplomacy, with or without Ukrainian government support, in the course of our life. It seems to me that our activity, to some extent, might systematize those efforts which have been exerted already by many people or been carried out by many people in order to offer in our strategy some specific vector or trend or direction to move along for not only for our institute. If I can comment on some of these issues, you can do that, but first of all, if you do not object, we can address the question to M&A. We do not have from the audience, local audience here, but I have my own question to M&A. You mentioned the availability of the Muslim population in Ukraine, and this is a kind of chance to open some other Muslim Islam countries in the world. 20% of the Russian population are Muslims, more than 30 million people. In our country, we are talking about slightly more than 30% of the population. How we can compete with that country? If we are talking about implementation, using that religious factor, maybe we can entertain some other issues in this context. For example, for the State Department, the religion is kind of taboo, something with topic which is forbidden, To talk about that, first of all, it's a Protestant country. They can use that in their policy, politics. I know that other countries have a different attitude toward that, but your opinion, I'm seeking your opinion on that subject matter.
Please turn on the mic. Do you hear me? Yes, thank you. I do not answer directly whether we are competitive with the Russian Federation. This is really difficult. First, Katerina said it correctly that our resource that Ukraine has, we cannot compare it. $4 billion are spent by Russia yearly for such influences, and cultural diplomacy is part of these influences. those manipulations that distort the essence of many processes in which Russian Federation interferes. And in the context of religion, I believe that we should speak about religious freedoms. We should be proud of this. Russia is an oppressive state, and we protect cultural and cultural rights, language rights of nations. In Russia, there are tens of indigenous peoples that are destroyed, and in Crimea, they try to get rid of the main language in Crimea for Crimean Tatars, and we should provide another case how to protect religious freedoms and language rights, and also how we can use this. This is the way to open the door, and I believe that in the countries of the Middle East, they do not know a lot about Ukraine. They know about Crimean Tatar people. I felt this myself. We have now active occupation of Crimea, and I would like to say that reforms and investment is only part of communication. No one for me, this priority to communicate this Russian aggression and the language we should use to, you know, that there is some fatigue in the world concerning Ukraine, and we should properly communicate by different ways. We should not forget about this factor of aggression. I believe that the Crimean Tatars, as Muslims, as an indigenous people that suffer in Crimea, the statistics of repression clearly shows that there is disproportion in repressions. The majority of political prisoners are Crimean Tatars. And through the articulation and informing what is this people, its history, not something separate, but as part of Ukrainian discourse, part of Ukrainian policy, this is the way how to, through protection of rights of Muslims and religious belief, this is opportunity to be heard. This will be a better way. Yes, I like your answer. I mean, I have one more question to you. We have 5 minutes with you. I have a question. On my page, I had discussion concerning cultural and public diplomacy, and opinions differ. There is a question about cooperation with our diplomatic institutions abroad and different projects concerning investment, culture promotion, instruments of public diplomacy. I cooperate with embassies abroad. I have been doing it for more than 20 years, and I saw the trend that sometimes embassies help or they may not help, but they would like to have a logo and to have some publications. And I understand that they want to show that they include this in their reports, and sometimes it works in Dubai. Arabs like this presence of the state, but in the Western countries, the presence of the state in the projects is viewed negatively in cultural projects, because it looks like propaganda, and there is lack of trust to this. And no trust to Ukrainian state, for example. This is not about Ukrainian state. This is the trust to power. The level of trust to power in Germany is not really high. It is higher than in Ukraine, but still not very high. And I have a question to you. And you are responsible for this area, you're first deputy minister. Maybe we should, whether we should have this logo, this emblem of Ukraine in all the countries concerning cultural projects. Do I understand correctly your question? Please correct me. if this question, you are right that sometimes we may see some competition in some cases. For example, if we have a powerful ambassador who has good reputation in the country, he is involved in some communication, and also there is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they should form the policy, and there is a clash of the ministry and embassy. This is the question of belonging of this communication, and there should be proper balance between the ministry and embassies. And the ministry should provide a strategy, and the operative activity should belong to embassies. If we are speaking about logo, do you speak about branding? Yes? Yeah, right. Logos on publications or on some billboards during events. I have clear view on this. There should be unique branding, because if we are speaking about the marketing of the process, it works better than something separate. Look, from the very start, I wanted to speak about challenge of any communication, including cultural diplomacy. This is high competitiveness of the brands, and this unique brand, it always works to create added value for representatives of the business, culture, and others, and for the state. So if some embassies want to have a separate brand, I don't believe this is correct. If we want to establish proper communication and bring messages. Maybe you didn't understand me correctly. Do we need state symbols? My argument is like this. If state is not seen behind these events of cultural or economic diplomacy, the better it is. There is more trust, better perception. As Mr. Krukov said, they are not interested they want to see philosophers, writers, painters, because there is more trust to such people. This is about credibility. Yes, I believe this is so. Official power cannot have a monopoly over the state. The state is a complex thing, and I am really loyal to this idea. And the presence of criticism and active participation of other representatives of the state, not only the representatives of power. This is about balanced strategy. And I understand that the time is up, and we will speak about these issues later, and we hope for fruitful cooperation. Katerina wants to answer this question, and after this, Vladimir will speak about this topic. So if this was a question for some officials in US, they would present their banner, their flag, concerning any product. Why should we be afraid to do this? If the project is successful, why, if there is a flag of Ukraine, why you think that they will have less trust because of this? We should be capable. We should propose to the world some projects, and the flag of Ukraine, it should be on the projects, especially if the embassies of Ukraine in any country of the world spends its time and intellectual and personal resources in order to have this project in the cooperation with the Ukrainian Institute. You should put the logo of the ministry, of the institute, of embassy. So there are many opinions on this. We would like to hear from Vladimir. And you see that there is no trident, no state blue and yellow flag. And in Sweden, they use other logos. And there is a reason for this. The reason is, if you do not have state logos, the trust is bigger. American Embassy in Ukraine, they carry out many projects of cultural diplomacy, and they put their logo. And the projects they finance, they want to see their logos in order that everyone understand that this was done with the use of U.S. money. And if they bring some blues or jazz performers, they do not put the logos there. So, because this would be too much. So this is my argument. Please understand me correctly. Vladimir?
I agree that not always the availability of the state symbols brings about more confidence or trust. We actually could feel that in our activities. There were some projects when we communicate with our potential partners, with the assistance of our embassies. So the message is either they do not want to deal with some governmental institutions, or they sometimes expect that the governmental body or institution will actually transmit some specific message and not promote, let's say, they try to use those messages for the artistic practice or some cultural message, etc., etc. And I agree that this happens, and we try to depart from these state symbols in our activity, like some similar institutions which operate in a similar way in other countries as well, because our task to create such a public, let's say, benefit for the state, and not to put our logo. And our activity actually is very beneficial to taxpayers. What we have to do sometimes, to create our subjectivity of those institutions. This is very important for new institutions, which we actually are. And those who would like to deal with our institute and we want somebody to deal with us, we have some good reputation, which is worth of this confidence or trust. And based on those arguments, we would like to underline our identity by creating the good record, which will help us to open some of the doors which are still closed on us or for us. I would like to react to some of the comments of my colleague speakers. This is kind of a through topic. I'm talking about the specifics and maybe more clear formulations, what the Ukrainians would like to achieve, or the cultural diplomacy would like to achieve in this or another country. And I must confess that we lacked such kind of landmark or the roadmap when we were working on this strategy on the part of the political priorities of MFA as such. Our next step, our publication of our strategy, we believe to be the use or involvement of the cooperation with many other players, let's say the MFA and the diplomats, etc. Maybe we can come in some country papers which will give us a clear answer in which context we operate and what are the peculiarities or specific features of this or another country, how active are Ukrainians in this or another country, what political tasks can be resolved by cultural diplomacy in those respective countries, and what kind of cultural task or let's say the general humanitarian issues we can resolve. What task we set before ourselves in the X country, for example. And it's very good that the speakers mentioned that today, because we really need such a kind of the landmarks or the roadmap. And as I mentioned before, we're going to work on that to create that in the future. If you're talking about whether our regional strategy is correct or not, it seems to us that this focus on those issues is very productive to us. If we just can break down the strategy into 15 or 20 countries, it will be the question why we did not crystallize or, let's say, in the mentioned above regions, or let's say in other areas like Black Sea region, or the let's say Eastern Partnership, or whether Euro-Atlantic direction, or should break down Europe into big quantity individual markets, which actually this continent is. There are a lot of different approaches. On the one hand, they contradict to each other, but on the other hand, they are required pieces of the whole puzzle. So we focused on the approach was mentioned by Katerina in the proactive direction, where culture is an important component, but one of the seven. And I would like to contradict your thesis that we culture-centric. No, of course, art is a cultural content. By default, we have to deal with that, but this is also, we are talking about the education sphere, the civil society aspect, academic community, and we are going to work on the cross-sectoral approach. Ukrainian language is the object, as a topic, as the asset of Ukraine, which is very important component of our identity. And those directions, we try to diversify, departing from the culture-centric approach. And I believe this is the strength of the document we are discussing today. Do we have some more time? Well, I understand that Sergei Korsonsky would like to say a few words about the topic we mentioned, FA cooperation within cultural projects. We can stop at that, and we can give the floor. You can to Sergei. I would like to recognize his right to the question, and I remember about Sergei, but they reminded me about that. So just a few words to crown my idea. There was a thesis about 30th anniversary of independence of Ukraine, a big opportunity for this country in its strategic communications, not only in cultural diplomacy. And there are quite a few topics like that, even for the next year, which are really very productive, both for the positive agenda of Ukrainian communication and using not really very positive pages of the history of our country. We have to talk about those more productively to bring those to the positive experience, to the positive agenda, how Ukraine can actually cope with that, with those challenges of the past. I'm talking about the 35th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident next year, and for example, whether in the context of Ukraine's presence in Japan or some other platforms, international platforms in other countries, we can be productive in revealing that topic. Again, the Babi Yar tragedy, which we're going to mark next year as well, anniversary, I mean. And those are the issues using which Ukraine can talk about its experience, what can be done, whatever is associated with that tragedy, and bring it into the real and positive strategy. And again, 150th anniversary since the birth date of Lesa Ukrainka next year again. So those are through focuses which we can talk about each year. Ukraine can find something in its history to program its cultural diplomacy. And very short, very briefly, what Andrei Kurko mentioned, to which extent culture can be an efficient tool for the explanation what Ukraine is, what gratifies our hearts, what are our aspirations, our hopes, etc. When Andrei was talking about literature, then can be, let's say, expanded or extended to different artistic spheres, because even the theater, literature, visual art, etc., everything can tell about us like none of the strategic communications or any official campaigns can talk about. Here we visualize the strengths of the cultural diplomacy, how we can use the life stories of the people of the country. Thank you. And before actually give the floor to Sergei, there is another question which was addressed to MNA, but since you're a representative of MFA, I address it to you. We were talking about priority of the regions and regions generally speaking. There is a question of Ms. Shklar, what we can expect, what projects in the sphere of cultural diplomacy which were held in the headquarters of international organizations. What strikes my mind, first of all, New York, Brussels, Geneva, Vienna, where they have the largest headquarters of UN and other international organizations. What do you think about that? Then I start from the end of your question. When we are talking about international organizations, as a rule, those are not the best platforms for cultural projects, and very often they are theme-based or topic-oriented. If you're talking International Day about combating the inhuman practice, and you can some product which can be demonstrated, they do something like that. But always they have kind of underpinning, political underpinning. But speaking in principle, we should not say completely say no to those. But I would like to mention what you said. If we are talking about cultural diplomacy, this is the direction where the PPP must become the basis for cooperation. It seems to me that the Ukrainian Institute can say what they are doing. It's not the Minister of Culture. There are a lot of associations. None of the efforts is futile. Of course, we use not much comparatively what we can do actually. We're talking about our cultural products. But giving you a specific example, that happened before this war when Yanukovych was in power. I'm talking when the Crimean Tatars wanted to demonstrate Kontrima a movie in Ankara. And Jamilov wanted to be there. And if you remember, Jamilov didn't have very good relations with Yanukovych. Actually, half government of Turkey was present at the demonstration during this session of these movies demonstrated. So my question is whether the Ukrainian ambassador would join them. Yes, he was. He even said a few words. Though they said that he was going after, if he appears there, he would have to go back home after that. I could not make it there. Bottom line is, we diplomats must be present there. I heard that during the war already when I was speaking at the university and I met with the public at large and I was telling the story what was happening. And they told me that you, Mr. Ambassador, use the same propaganda as the Russian ambassador does. I would like to say that we have to independently invite analysts, experts. In this case, even when we're talking about culture, it should go hand in hand, in parallel to what I mentioned. But I do hope that the Ukrainian Institute will do that before going to this or another country, before starting or launching a large project and start the preparation for that. We have to take advice from the local embassy. A few days ago, actually there was information. There was two boys in Japan who have are fluent in Japanese language. They have their own channels, and they actually appear in the Ukrainian T-shirt with the inscription. The national team of Ukraine football team, and the local citizens, they take a lot of fun and they actually read that because they know those are not Japanese citizens, but they really have a lot of subscribers. A lot of people watch their transmissions, and of course, when we are talk about the project, I will take this opportunity by all means. To use the product which we have still to create. This is not an expensive project. Those are the kind of really not cheap one as compared to some big show, etc. But you can involve or attract a big and large straight of the Japanese youth in the embassy actually exists. One of the tasks of the embassies is to give advices. And Dream mentioned that books. I didn't know anything about that book, but if and there is mention of Fukushima, the opportunity to work within the boundaries of the Chernobyl topic. We can talk about that. We can take each other's advice, and I don't see any problem if it's clearly understood that that the activities of the embassy is going to be taken as a propaganda tool. Well, you're welcome to think about that. Most important is the essence of what we are doing. It's very difficult to measure the difference between that. It's very difficult to say whether that program last year was efficient or not, but it actually had it echoed within the hearts and minds of some of the people. So it's very important to take advice of each other and then to introduce corrections into your steps, and then you have to try to achieve the maximum possible results and not to be concerned about what is doing that or not, Ambassador. Thank you very much, Sergey, for very good examples for your energy shared with us. Those are very important things. I believe that there is an energy emanated by our ambassador in Japan, because very often there was a case when, there were just a few cases similar to that in the past. So I would like to give you one example. 15 years ago, I had a client, a Ukrainian businessman who dreamt make acquaintance with Weekend Yu in Singapore when he was still at power. He went to Singapore. He tried to understand how he can actually make an appointment with Yu, and he said that he liked very much classical music. And he sponsored actually the concert of Ukrainian classical music ensemble in Esplanade, like La Scala, but in Singapore, sort. A lot of Singapore citizens, Singapore elite, visited that, and they were at raptures. They didn't know that in Ukraine they have such a nice classical music. That was a very expensive let's say, event. But he was a rich person, and he sponsored that, and he met with Silicon U, and then he actually he spent some money to publish some of the works of Silicon U in Ukraine. So that was in the long run. In the end of the day, that was a kind of promotion of Ukraine, or making more Ukraine closer to the local citizens. So speaking about Andrei Kurkov, my question is about the role of the state in different processes. As you know, Europe constantly tries to catch up with United States in their competitiveness in the sphere of innovations and technology. Even say Europe, I'm talking about EU. They try to simulate innovations, technologies to come up with subsidies, etc., support, but they cannot catch up the United States, because the United States companies are one of the largest in the world. They cannot possibly do that, So when we're talking about the United States, there is no role of the state. We are talking about the role of business, etc. So it deals with the culture. For example, the example given by Andrei Kurkov about Albanian writer who spent 20 years of his life in France and who described the Albanian culture. Maybe that was the best possible thing what Albanians could do to give the picture of Albania. Like who immigrated, the Czech writer, he managed to describe who are Czechs, what is Czech Republic, generally speaking. And I don't know where is this kind of the borderline between the two. I know that there are some guys you mentioned who fluently speak Japanese. The creativity is something, well, this is creativity. It does not tolerate some external impact that cannot be created artificial. Andrei, what do you think about that? First of all, I agree that the state by itself cannot create or select the musician or a musician or writer who can become popular abroad. the state can work with the material which has been self-made, so to say. We have to understand that the European approach is the same. The French people, the people through the Skovoroda program, through the embassy of France in Ukraine, those French art figures who made themselves. And now France actually pushes them and uses that. And the best example of the French culture in doing that, they actually try to expand their cultural influence, and through this cultural influence to expand their political impact or influence. In this sense, we should not invent the bicycle, or wheel. Ukrainian creative workers go where they are invited by this or another country, but the state, actually the government, can find some platforms and propose to those platforms that the state of Ukraine will support or help those platforms to hold the discussions or the meetings with Ukrainian artists or art figures. For example, there is a well-known Royal Festival Zone in London on the Thames River. This is a concert hall with a lot of several small rooms or halls and big hall. And they present their culture, their philosophy all the time. So they actually approach the managers, and they, for example, they planned the weeks or the 10 days of Polish culture. They allocate the budgetary money for the representatives of Polish culture to go there, and those who are interested in that, they come to London. Actually, this is free of charge for the visitors, and they can listen to Polish poetry, Polish history, etc., etc. I was there more than once. Many countries actually were represented there. Ukraine, never. So they can invite Ukrainians, but they have to. They propose themselves as the potential art figures who can go there and show themselves, so to say, that Ukraine can propose to different festivals to invite Ukraine as the honorary guest or the special guest in the realm of cinema, literature, or anything else. Actually managed once to persuade one of the most popular festivals in Cognac city of France, this Festival of Literature of European Union, to make Ukraine and invite Ukraine as the honorary guest. And that was the first time after Spain when Ukraine was invited in the capacity of the honorary guest in that festival. What they did in those days, they selected 6 writers, 6 books written by Ukrainians. They already had been published by that time. And they sent those books to all the libraries of that regions. And they asked the readers to vote for the best book in their mind and to decide which is the best book. So 48,000 readers actually got acquainted with Ukrainian culture or Ukrainian books translated into French in that small region. The same can be done by any or in any European country, given the support on the government, on the part of the government or the local embassy, just to prove that we have something to sell in the cultural sense. That I would like to thank Andriy for this message, which we actually share with you completely. This has something to do not so much with the strategy, but rather with tactics. You mentioned that festival hall. This is part of the South Bank Center, immediate to the south of Big Ben and the Parliament. If it were not for the COVID-19 pandemic, we would have for the first time ever, opportunity to represent Ukraine culture. It's kind of co-production, theatralized or staged show, British Ukrainian. We plan to demonstrate that on the central London platform or stage, dealing with exclusive art and the novel forms of self-expression which are practiced in different countries of Europe and the United States. And this kind of pitch of Ukraine as a focus country abroad, this is a super wonderful idea. And if we're talking about our efforts, last year such focus country, owing to our project Ukraine, was presented at the Biennale, in the biggest Austrian festival. In the Austrian showcase was again, Ukraine is going to be one of the two focus countries, which we are going to present six musical teams. This year in New York, we had a festival of Ukrainian music with our support, 3-day festival, and they close unknown strangers, I would say, okay, in Poland, and they agreed to take Ukraine as its closest neighboring country, and they agreed to dedicate this year's festival completely to this topic. Now, this is superb, and since we are talking about the regions and the priorities and the foreign policy, I have a question which is close to the audience who watch us now. When I went to the United States, which is called Global Village in the United States for 1 year, I really decided I'm going to be still from Brazil. Everybody was two countries in that. Brazil is a huge country, a very powerful country. A member of the G20. In Africa, you have the South African Republic, or Nigeria, with 160 million strong people, which is a very promising country for us. Maybe we can explain something there. Maybe it's planned for later. Maybe something can happen there, maybe in different scale, but like as compared to some priority regions. But anyway, I believe this is something to do with the Catherine thesis about ambitions, maybe too big ambitions, given the resources available to us today. I believe that those numerous questions, wishes, etc., how are you going to work in this or another region? This country is also very important, but it's not included in your geographical plan, so to say. How are you going to articulate your priorities, whether there is more cultures and diplomacy or vice versa? So what's the experience of the Ukrainian Institute? My questions to Catherine. And Ukrainian Institute as a profile institute in the sphere of cultural diplomacy, they try to embrace what cannot be embraced, actually, so to say. I repeat myself, I'm not talking about the Ukrainian Institute per se, but the cultural development in general speaking. Answering your question, I can say that we cannot embrace unembraceable today. We have to understand that we have to understand the expectations, what they expect of us. There are different talks, and they help to make our answers to those questions more specific, because during such discussions or result of the discussions can find the answers. Since we almost exhausted our time bracket, so a few minutes to each one. We start with Katerina and Gennady, and Vladimir, you're going to finish, and the Sergei, of course, and then we are going to close our discussion. Catherine, you have the floor. Well, actually, I would like once again to call upon the Ukrainian Institute to clearly prioritize their goals and objectives for next year. You mentioned that there is anniversary of Babi Yar in Chernobyl and 150th anniversary of the birth of Lisa Ukrainka. Those are very important things. But given the budget which you have, you won't be able to take care of all those. But it seems to me 30th anniversary of independence, this could become the most positive message to all. A very short advice. Maybe you can find a slot in your very busy agenda one day when you can communicate only with the ambassadors who work in different countries. You have to generate a list of different countries and communicate with each of the ambassadors in those countries. I believe that during those Skype communication, you'll crystallize a lot of different issues, arguments, communications, and you can actually find a bridge between the culture, diplomacy, between the MFA and our ambassadors who are actually soldiers in the fields. In the field, Gennady, thank you. If I were ambassador in Brazil, it would be superb, But there are two different things. First of all, this issue is not to the Ukrainian Institute, but to MFA, which mentioned that region is one of the priority. Maybe in this case, it would be easier for the institute to work later when we have something in place already. On the other hand, it is important to have the proactivity of those people who working along those lines. A lot depends on this or another ambassador, to which extent he understands those problems or those issues. The expert diplomati issue, and the different experts can go to this or another country. More active ambassadors make use of that, or use that. Less active, they forget about that, so to say. Andrei, please switch on your mic. Well, speaking about the devices, I would like, when the Ukrainian culture is represented abroad to support the image of Ukraine, we should not forget about national minorities or ethnic minorities, Ukrainian Hungarians, Ukrainian Tatars. And it comes to my mind that recently I visited UN premises in New York, and we could hang on the wall some pictures or canvases of the Crimean Tatar artists under the brand of Ukraine. This could be a very good message. There is something we can do, a lot we can do. And the last thing, word of mine. So look how Alexander Sherburne has worked and still works in Austria, how much he did for the Austrians to fall in love with Ukrainian culture, and so that they could feel almost our close relatives, our kin. I believe that the experience of such diplomats of Alexander Sherburne should be disseminated. He's not the only one. He's one of few, but we have the diplomats, I mean to say, who know how to promote the cultural image of Ukraine. Sergei? Sergei? I think it was Vasily. I would like to use your example about Singapore. This is a brilliant example, and I would like to use this example. Maybe this is a good opportunity for the Ukrainian Institute to pay attention to the fact that a very interesting idea is involvement of sponsors, the concerned parties, so to say. There are some of those, and there are the interests not only to meet with some persons, but generally speaking, such projects for many people who have financial resources for self-assertion, let's say, and we have to make use of that. We did that in Turkey, in this really very, very serious assistance. Not only PPP is important, but also the public oligarch partnership. We can use that partnership. Let them work for the country, Vladimir, your closing remarks. Thank you very much indeed. Very briefly, this week, not only one day has been allocated for the communication with the embassies, but two. We already communicated today with the Qatar and Hungary. We had the meeting with the ambassadors who are going to go to France in September this year. This morning we talked to our colleague in Japan and continuing our talk with Sergei. We are talking about the year 2021, and we are working on that. We hope that we are going to be even more active in our dealing with communication with diplomats. Another thesis of yours also, I like very much. This is going to be to West Street. So our proposals must overlap the confidence and of the MFA. I mean, and and Andriy aptly mentioned that about the representation of ethnic minorities and multifacetedness of Ukrainian culture abroad, and we have to do that via our Crimean program, which is going to have a kind of through approach. We are going to use this added value to our work through the voices of of the Ukrainian Tatars and our Ukrainian community, generally speaking. I would like to say that again, this this is what if we're talking about the Ukrainian Institute, our foreign establishments is well understood by the MFA, and MNA is a very big advocate, Mr. Kuleba as well, in order to strengthen and broaden those efforts in the future, which I would like to have. And thank you for your remarks. I would like to thank again to all the speakers, Sergei, Andriy, Katerina, Vladimir Gennadievich. And you made it more or less funny, which is wonderful, and it's very good that we discuss the cultural diplomacy in the context of the regional priorities.